33-year-old male found dead a few days ago. Someone amongst them is our killer.
Iran, 1979. The worst hostage crisis in American history begins. Unknown to the world at the time, US Embassy staff escape and find their way to the house of Canadian diplomats, where they spend 85 days in hiding.
The longer that we were in hiding, the more the potential was that we would be found.
When the Central Intelligence Agency learn of the Americans on the run, they assign one of their top escape agents, Tony Mendez, to get them out. He comes up with an extraordinary plan to walk the diplomats out of Iran in broad daylight, posing as a Hollywood film crew.
It was a perfect example of truth being stranger than fiction.
The CIA now pushes its tradecraft to the limit as they set out to disguise and train 6 ordinary Americans in the art of escape. This is the real-life story of what would later become an Oscar-winning Hollywood sensation. But what isn't in the Hollywood version are the extraordinary details of an operation the CIA kept hidden away in classified files until now.
It's the secret story of how the CIA fooled everyone.
In late 1979, thousands of anti-American protesters in Iran are gathering outside the US Embassy. Demonstrations against America are common. Iran is still in the throes of an Islamic revolution, and America is being accused of aiding and abetting the hated exiled dictator, the Shah Reza Pahlavi. This is one of hundreds of protests organized by militant revolutionary students. But this time, it's different.
Few of them had makeshift weapons, bike chains or a baseball bat, though some of them did have pistols. Massive crowd, 1,000 people, roaring, "Down with America, death to Carter."
Inside the embassy, staff can see the disturbance from the office windows. Shortly after 9 a.m., the chains of the gate are cut. A small breakaway group of student militants heads for the main embassy building, the Chancery.
They broke the window and they were able to enter into the basement. The Iranians made their way up to the second floor, had captured some Americans and said, "Let us in, otherwise, we'll harm these people."
Adjacent to the Chancery is another building, the Consulate. Inside, there are more Americans. One of them is Mark Lyjek.
We started hearing kind of a hubbub coming from the waiting area. People talking about demonstrators roaming inside the compound.
Mark Lyjek's wife, Cora, is also in the consulate.
We did hear footsteps on the roof, and we thought that maybe somebody was going to try to get in and find access into the building, so that was a bit scary.
All the lights went out. Apparently the demonstrators had gotten into the power station and cut off the power.
Someone threw a brick or a rock through the window, and the Marine went running in and saw a guy climbing up a ladder.
The diplomats now realize that the embassy compound is completely overrun by demonstrators. At first, one of the US Marines guarding the consulate advises them to stay inside the building. They hear on the radio that armed militants are trying to kidnap the rest of the Americans. They now know that they're in grave danger. They must escape fast.
They realized that the chancery had been broken into and that they really couldn't hold out any longer.
They're advised to head to the nearby British embassy with the help of a local Iranian guide. So they make their way to a side door of the consulate that leads directly onto the streets of Tehran. Only steps away are thousands and thousands of angry Iranian protesters. Among the first out are Mark and Cora Lijek.
When I first left the embassy, I was certainly nervous. I felt very conspicuous.
We were trying not to stand out. We were trying to blend in with the people that were walking away.
Step by step, trying to get away.
They are followed by Joe Stafford, his wife Kathy, and Bob Anders. The five avoid the angry crowds now behind them and head southwest towards the British embassy, led by their Iranian guide.
She pulled me to the side, and the rest of our group also went to the side, and she says, there's a demonstration, we can't go there.
We saw a demonstration there, so we decided that was not a good idea.
In the end, they head to Bob Anders' apartment and remain there, terrified of stepping back onto the streets of Tehran. In Washington, while the embassy crisis is unfolding, it's still the early hours of Sunday morning. Calls from Iran begin to trickle in to the State Department. The president is alerted as dawn rises. And so is the Central Intelligence Agency.
Upon receiving the information that the embassy had been overrun, the CIA would have immediately been concerned for the safety of its people.
By the time America wakes up, the revolutionary students have declared a victory. Day one of the world's biggest ever international hostage crisis has begun.
They were paraded in front of the cameras, and this was a big victory for the students. I mean, they were very surprised that they'd actually been able to pull it off.
66 Americans are now being held hostage at gunpoint. At this stage, the CIA have no idea that there's a group of diplomats on the run.
We felt very dangerous, a very dangerous situation.
What happens next is not portrayed in the Hollywood movie. After their first night in hiding, the escapees make a nail-biting series of overnight stays at 5 different locations in Tehran. This includes the British ambassador's residence. This takes place over 6 grueling days.
They're literally going from house to house to house.
The most terrifying time was either Wednesday or Thursday night. All night long, the local watchman kept blowing a whistle about every 10 or 15 minutes. Our nerves were raw.
The 6 days that we spent on our own was the scariest time. The Iranians were rounding people up because the other Americans that we'd been in touch with in the first days, who were still out, were gradually being arrested, seized.
Desperate, and with no idea what to do, Bob Anders remembers a friend in the Canadian embassy and gives him a call. His name is John Sheardown.
Bob said, well, I'm not alone. There's 5 of us. And John said, bring them all.
6 days after they first step out of the US Embassy onto the streets of Tehran, the escapees finally reach the Canadian house. With their fellow Americans held hostage at gunpoint, they themselves are now effectively fugitives at large in Iran. Terrified of being caught, confused about what to do next, and exhausted, they now have just one hope: rescue by the CIA.
I had the sense anyway that Washington had sort of forgotten about us.
1 month after the embassy takeover, and the State Department is still consumed by the ever-worsening hostage crisis.
The American hostages.
No act has so galvanized the American public toward unity in the last decade as has the holding of our people as hostages in Tehran.
While State Department staff grapple with how to deal with the embassy, they also become aware of the 6 escapees through information sent from Canadian officials in Tehran. The State Department turns to the CIA. In early December, a series of top-secret flash cables arrive on the desk of an intelligence officer called Tony Mendez. Flash cables are the highest priority communications, usually restricted to wars or the most urgent of information.
Tony saw these cables on his desk, and at the top of them were these marked flash, which you almost never see. In fact, some communicators, he told me, can go their whole careers without ever seeing one.
The flash cables are about the escaped diplomats.
On December 10th, when Tony heard that there were 6 Americans stranded outside the embassy, immediately his mind would have kicked into gear.
Tony Mendez is a rising star within the CIA. He's carried out numerous undercover rescue operations, which the agency call exfiltrations, or extracting assets out of dangerous places.
His job was getting people out of tough spots, rescuing people from dangerous areas.
He's known as the Master of Disguise and works in a highly secretive specialist department known as OTS.
OTS is the Office of Technical Service, and they are the CIA's gadget makers.
These are the people in the film James Bond, which would be the Q. You know, these are they give the equipment.
With the arrival of the flash cables, Mendez and the OTS are about to receive their biggest challenge yet. Mendez is called to a meeting at the State Department.
They discuss what they thought they should do to help rescue these people. Tony immediately sort of let them know that they should let him and the experts at the CIA worry about this. And they did.
The rescue is now in Mendez's hands. Along with his team of specialists at OTS, he sets to work on a plan that will get them out in broad daylight. The first problem: the escapees are American, and the Iranian authorities will be on the lookout for any Americans trying to leave the country.
The U.S. is the hated enemy.
The second problem is that the diplomats are untrained in spy tradecraft. They simply won't have the ability of accomplished agents to suddenly adopt an alien identity.
They were completely unwitting of this black world in which people can be exfiltrated.
So Mendez wants to find them a plausible reason to be in Iran, which will fool the Iranians, and one which any ordinary English-speaking American can fake.
The key is, if they spoke English, what other possible country wasn't Iran mad at? The answer, of course, is Canada.
Mendez has a hunch that Canada offers the diplomats their best chance. But he's worried that the Canadian government won't break its own protocol and issue citizens from another country fake passports.
Unfortunately, the Canadians had a law that said, you can't just give out passports to anybody. The foreign minister, along with the prime minister, got together and they were able to sort of circumvent the parliament so that they could pass this exception to their laws.
With the Canadian passports secured, next, Mendes now needs a cover story.
He wanted to create a story that was so unbelievable, so crazy and over the top that no one would believe that it was fake.
After endless days and nights, searching for the perfect cover story, Mendes hits on an idea. Suppose the diplomats are Canadians who are part of a Hollywood film crew, and their cover story is that they're on a special trip to look at filming locations. Despite the revolution, the cultural sector of the new Iranian government still wants to attract foreign currency, and that includes film investment.
The plan is implausible. It's improbable that it would work. It is fraught with problems, and 1,000 things could go wrong.
Not the least of the problems is that Mendes knows little about Hollywood film crews. So he calls up an old friend in California, John Chambers, an Oscar-winning makeup artist famous for his effects on Planet of the Apes.
So he called his friend, John Chambers, to find out if it would be feasible and what kind of people would go on a location scouting party. And after Chambers ticked off the various jobs that a person would have, Tony realized that it was a perfect solution.
Back in Iran, the escapees are following developments in the ongoing hostage crisis at the US Embassy.
We had an old television, so we did see some footage of the hostages blindfolded and being led around.
They're completely helpless at the mercy of this crowd of people around them pushing them out, and that was pretty scary.
The diplomats have been joined by one more, Lee Schatz, another American working at the embassy, whose escape had been engineered by the Swedes. The 6 are now known as the house guests. After living with the Canadians for what, by Christmas, is now well over 40 days.
The longer that we were in hiding, the more the potential was that we would be found.
Day by day, the danger for the house guests is increasing. Odds are that sooner or later the diplomats will be discovered and turned over to the authorities. It's now a race against time. In early January, Mendes goes to Los Angeles on a 4-day trip to execute the first stage of his elaborate Hollywood ruse by visiting his old friend, John Chambers. With him, $10,000 of CIA cash, hidden in a secret compartment of his briefcase.
Tony had to come out to Los Angeles to try to put this plan into motion. Goes to John Chambers' house, and they sit down.
Mendes turns to Chambers and a colleague of his, Bob Seidel, to help him build up what will look like a genuine Hollywood production from scratch.
Bob was really surprised when he shows up at John Chambers' house, and they're sitting in the breakfast nook, and then here's a CIA officer saying, we have to rescue some Americans who are stuck on the lam in Tehran. That was not what he expected that morning.
The 3 work fast and quickly find the script of an unmade film called Lord of Light.
Tony says, this is exactly what we need. It kind of has a Middle Eastern feel to it. So he says, let's call it Argo. And they realize that it also has a kind of mythical connotation. Jason and the Argonauts, it's the ship that the Argonauts sailed on. And Tony says, this is perfect.
With the script problem solved, next, they need a Hollywood office.
We're just coming up here on Sunset Gower Studios. This is the lot that used to be the Columbia lot, actually. And this is where Tony and John Chambers and Bob Seidel took over an office that had just been occupied by Michael Douglas for the China Syndrome, and it was empty, so that's where they set up their fake film production.
Mendes names the production company Studio 6 after the 6 diplomats he must rescue. Chambers and Seidel agree to run it on behalf of the CIA. While in California, Mendes also turns his attention to the minutiae of the operation, collecting what the CIA call pocket litter. Pocket litter refers to all the tiny details which the authorities might check during the escape.
Tony would have had to consider every possibility. Everything from the labels on their clothing down to matchbooks that came from Ottawa, or bits that would be associated either with the movie industry or with Canada. Everything had to support the central cover.
Preparations for the exfiltration do not stop here. When Mendes gets back to OTS offices, he draws on his huge team of CIA technical specialists to work on the details.
He was supported by literally hundreds of people. He had disguise specialists. He had graphics people. He had document validators, how to talk about forgery. He had individuals that could talk about clothing. What would a Canadian film crew look like?
Back in Iran, the house guests have now been in hiding not for days, but months. The endless waiting has begun to unnerve them. And by this stage, any small incident is enough to cause huge alarm.
We had one incident where a helicopter flew low, very low, over the house. It scared us. We were tense. Even though we were in a safe place, it didn't take much to trigger this sort of flight response or panic, whatever you want to call it.
Fear, paranoia, and frustration. Their combined effect begins to wear down the mental state of the trapped diplomats. Their worries are well-founded. Inside the US Embassy, the hostages are being mistreated, even being subjected to terrifying mock executions. Despite the pressure, the house guests do whatever they can just to get through the endless weeks in hiding. This is helped by their Canadian hosts, the Sheerdowns.
The atmosphere that was created by the Sheerdowns through the family kind of setup that we had, the social events that they did for us, I think they helped us as much as possible have a normal life.
I think John realized that in order to keep us mentally healthy, you might say, that there were certain things that they could do. One of them was the routine that we had with the formal dinner and the conversation following. Another was they would have parties for us a couple times a month. They would invite people from other embassies, such as the New Zealanders and the Danish ambassador, people who knew about us, so that we could have normal social interaction with people outside of our very limited circle.
Some of their most memorable occasions include both a Thanksgiving and a Christmas feast, enjoyed in the sumptuous setting of John Sheerdown's diplomatic house.
Due to a strange fluke, the Sheerdowns had stocked their basement with alcohol because they were next in line to host one of these embassy functions that the foreign diplomats would have. Obviously that didn't happen because of the embassy takeover that sort of shut all that stuff down, but the house guests had this abundant supply of wine and liquor and these kinds of things, so they often threw themselves little parties and they drank. But there was also a lot of tension, and there were some tense moments when they were worried about being discovered.
I felt like we were on the Titanic, and that we didn't know when we were going to hit the iceberg, but unlike the people on the real Titanic, we knew that there were icebergs out there and that it was potentially possible that any day we could run into one.
Unable to leave the house and living behind closed doors, The diplomats pass endless hours in whatever way they can. It's just a waiting game.
John Sheardown had a big library. We did a lot of reading. I read 27 books during that time. I think Mark Lyjak more than doubled that. We played Monopoly, Scrabble, Bridge. You know, there's always the worry in the back of your mind, you know, that we might be caught.
They became a bit stir-crazy. They had to stay inside. There were times when visitors would come over to the house, they would lock themselves in their room, they would hide under the bed. They were very nervous about making an untoward sound, anything that could attract attention.
In Washington, the CIA also feel the pressure. Mendez sets a date for the exfiltration, January 25th, 1980. The risks are so great that rather than send another agent, he'll go there himself. He selects a colleague, codenamed Julio, who speaks Farsi, the language of Iran, to travel with him. The CIA are also in contact with the Canadian ambassador, Kenneth Taylor, who has been protecting the house guests since the start. Soon Mendez will meet them all face to face, and their freedom will pass from the hands of the Canadians to those of the CIA agents. If it all goes wrong and fails, then ultimately their own lives could also be on the line. Almost 3 months since the first day of the diplomats' escape, top intelligence agent Tony Mendez and a colleague codenamed Julio arrive in Iran. Most of this time, the Canadian ambassador has been in secret communication with the CIA and knows they're coming. When they arrive at the Canadian diplomat's house, the house guests have no idea what to expect.
2 gentlemen in trench coats showed up, which was appropriate, of course. Tony introduced himself as Kevin Harkins. There was another gentleman with him, but he stayed in the background pretty much.
The man who calls himself Kevin Harkins, in fact, Tony Mendez, immediately begins to assess the diplomat's mental state after 80 days in hiding.
When Tony joined the group, he selectively and very carefully began to analyze each one of them, saying, who is the individual that I least need to worry about? And who do I need to focus on?
Mendez is looking out for the weakest link, the person most likely to panic during the escape. The house guests are also making an assessment of their own. Can this man really get them out of here? And how?
When Tony offered the Hollywood scenario, I liked it immediately.
They set up an office in Hollywood, and everyone had their business card. And here's mine right here.
The Argo plan impresses most of the house guests, but not all of them are immediately convinced.
I got to admit, I was taken aback by it because it's not something I'd been thinking about for the last 3 months.
The challenge for Mendez is to open the diplomats' eyes to an entirely new illusionary world of falsity and pretense. They must somehow come to terms with playing Hollywood characters that don't exist, except in the eyes of the Iranians. So Mendez plays a small conjurer's trick on them to get them thinking about the deception they'll have to perform themselves to escape.
So he comes in and he performs this little parlor trick that he does with 2 corks. He holds them in his hand, kind of forming 2 Ds, and he magically separates them, making it look as if one cork has passed through the other.
And I know it was just a trick, it was just a sleight of hand, but somehow I was kind of amazed by the little hand trick. I thought, well, he can do this, and he's saying he's got all this experience, so I think that we can trust him.
I think he said it's the point of it. It's the whole thing is an illusion, trying to put something over on somebody. you're playing a role. You're a different person, so you're trying to fool somebody. So it's not real. It's an illusion.
These are the very first moments that the master of disguise has with the house guests. Just the beginning of the preparations. He knows the Hollywood plan is a big ask for civilians not used to undercover operations. Even so, Mendes issues them with their aliases, the people they're going to have to pretend to be on the day of the escape. Cora Lyjek is told that she is no longer Mark Lyjek's wife, but the Hollywood scriptwriter, Teresa Harris.
Someone had obviously read our files because my birthday was my mother's month and day, and it was my year. So it was things that I already knew. And I actually went to school with a woman named Teresa Harris, who shares my actual real birthday. I don't know if that's a fluke.
The next day, CIA agents Tony Mendez and Julio drive through Tehran to the Canadian embassy. Here, they have to perform a critical piece of CIA tradecraft, forging the travel documents of the 6 escapees. Watched by the Canadian ambassador, Kenneth Taylor, Mendez forges the travel documents. He needs to create a record of these false identities having entered Iran.
And he'd have had a number of tools. He would have had, of course, a magnifying glass. He would have had a forger's kit. And he would have used what's called the forger's bridge, which is a way to rest his hands on the document that don't smear the ink, but allow him to put in the final details. If they look too perfect, there's something wrong with them. But if they're too haphazard, they may not be believable.
To match the ink used by the Iranian authorities, Mendez uses an ink pad supplied by the CIA, but it has dried up and doesn't work.
Now, here is where the artistic side of Tony comes in. He walks over to Ken Taylor's liquor cabinet. He selects a scotch with a high octane quality. He pours some scotch onto the pad. And sure enough, they come out perfectly.
It's the final day of the escape preparations. Tomorrow, they will head to Tehran's airport and try to flee the country. But Mendez and Julio are not sure that the house guests are adequately prepared.
So on Sunday night, Tony goes back to the Sheerdowns to meet up with the house guests, and he's very surprised by what he sees.
What he sees is that the house guests are scrambling through all their clothes, completely absorbed in the characters they will play. They have to transform themselves from bureaucrats into fashionable Hollywood filmmakers.
Bob Anders, I think, won the prize, though. I mean, he decided to become very flamboyant. I think he unbuttoned his shirt down to about the middle of his chest. Bob has quite a bit of chest hair, so he displayed that prominently. I'm looking under my shirt, you know, and I thought, well, maybe if I had some kind of a chain, you know, with a medallion or something, and that would fit, you know, that'd be sort of Hollywoodish. And so then I said, yeah, that's the me, that's the new me, you know, that's Robert Baker that works for Studio 6.
The house guests begin to enjoy playing their flamboyant Hollywood characters. But Mendez is still concerned that they haven't yet taken on board the full gravity of the escape. So with the help of Roger Lucy, a colleague of the ambassador, he decides to put them through a mock interrogation.
And he took it very seriously. He actually wore these leather boots, he had a camouflage jacket, a little swagger stick. And he got right in their faces.
Roger, he was playing his role as the interrogator. He was playing it to the hilt, so he gave him some kind of a very serious threat. I forget exactly what it was, but something like he was going to be taken away and probably executed. And this gave us all a little start. Said, well, we have to take this thing seriously, and it's not just a game that we're playing.
I think the point was to make sure that we had those answers down so fast that we could spit them out and not give us time to think, to remember. They had to be right there. We had to be able to recall them immediately, and it was effective, I think.
After only 2 days of preparation, Mendez decides the time has come for the diplomats to make a break for it. If he's right, it could be their ticket out. But if he's wrong, their freedom, even their lives, could be on the line. The day of reckoning has arrived. Once the group enters the airport, there will be no turning back.
This was the moment of truth. He knew that this was life or death.
As day breaks, Mendez enters the airport, soon to be followed by the 6 diplomats.
The initial shock of entering a brightly lit, crowded place after being in hiding for 3 months definitely was something to deal with.
After checking in their bags, they face their first big test, getting through passport control. But right from the start, it looks like it could go wrong. Lee Schatz breaks away from the house guests and their agreed plan.
And Lee was sort of standing there, a little nervous. He was beginning to look around, a little worried.
The customs official looks at Lee Schatz's passport photo, notices his moustache, and thinks maybe it's a different person.
Immigration's officer looked at him, looked at his photo, did a double take, and then took his passport and left and went into a back room.
Mendez can only watch from a distance, hoping Schatz won't panic.
Tony's greatest fear was that they would panic, they would break cover, they would confess, refuse to go through the screening process, and literally be frozen by fear. And it's this point, even a tiny bead of sweat running off their forehead could betray the fact that these passports weren't legitimate.
When the official comes back, Schatz tries to explain that he's trimmed his moustache, and it really is him in the photograph.
And he basically told the guy, well, I trimmed my mustache. And he stamped the passport, and he let him go.
After Lee Schatz, the rest of the house guests file through passport control. But the team are not yet through. Ahead, they still face the riskiest part of the escape, presenting their departure forms at final immigration.
All of this work came up to the point is, could the departure forms that they were carrying, would they be matched to the originals?
White forms, in theory, filled in on entry to Iran, but which the escapees don't have, must match the yellow exit forms Mendez has forged. If the officials try to cross-check the forms against each other, it will all go wrong. It's a chance Mendez has to take.
If any one of the 6 had failed, they would not only have been arrested, but Tony likely would have been shot.
You feel very powerless.
When we got to the immigration desk, there was no one there.
Cora went kind of in the back there and started yelling. And nobody came, so she yelled again, and this sleepy-looking guy came out carrying a teapot, and he put the teapot down, and he grabbed our passports, pulled the cards out, handed them back to us. He didn't even look at us at all at any point in this process. And we thanked him, and then we headed off to the departure lounge.
All 6 escapees make it through the critical stage. The official hardly looks at the yellow forms that Mendez has forged. The house guests now assemble in the departure lounge, waiting for their flight call. Then, bad news.
We are sorry to inform you that Swiss Air Flight 363 will be delayed due to mechanical problems.
Something always happens unexpected. And in this instance, it does. The flight is delayed.
The delay means that their chances of being found out are now increasing. Minute after minute, the elite Revolutionary Guards, who Mendez hoped to avoid, are now coming on duty. They're trained to be on the lookout for spies. The delay means that the diplomats must maintain their disguises potentially for hours.
You feel very powerless, and that makes the time drag even longer.
They don't know, are the Revolutionary Guard onto them? Are they scrutinizing the papers? Are they going to be matching the white and yellow copies?
The worry for Mendez is, how long can they maintain their disguises before they give everything away? And can they hold their nerve in front of the feared Revolutionary Guards?
The longer we were there, the greater the chance of somebody recognizing any one of us.
The delayed flight has left the escapees exposed. Kathy, Joe, and Cora Lijek have more reason to be worried than the others. Because they work in the visa section of the consulate, dealing with Iranians every day, their faces are familiar. They could be spotted at any time.
Kathy, Joe, and I had all worked on the visa line. I was worried that just by coincidence, somebody in the airport would recognize Kathy, Joe, or myself. I don't think we were talking very much. We'd kind of gone quiet. We'd done everything we could. We just wanted to get out of that room and onto the airplane.
The presence of the Revolutionary Guards, who are now coming on duty, ramps up the pressure to another level.
The departure lounge itself is filling up. As the day is progressing, more and more Revolutionary Guards are coming in. They're beginning to harass the people.
As they wait, Mendez sees that the Revolutionary Guards are stopping other passengers and questioning them.
They're looking for Iranians who are trying to steal wealth and leave the country, but they're starting to turn and look at foreigners as well.
After years of carrying out undercover exfiltrations, Mendez knows that it's in these unexpected moments that the escapees are most likely to panic. They have already begun to make their first mistakes. For Mendez, this is nerve-wracking.
One of the people in the group really didn't want to leave. He felt we were abandoning the hostages. He never really got into the story and the role. And in fact, when we went to the waiting room, he called me by my real name, Cora. Mark and I moved away from that person and decided to kind of keep a distance from them.
Another mistake is when a nervous house guest picks up an Iranian newspaper, written in the local language of Farsi. It will be highly unlikely for a Hollywood filmmaker to be doing this. Exactly the kind of giveaway a trained Revolutionary Guard would be looking for.
Tony went over to him and said, put the paper down. You should probably not be a Farsi speaker or be able to read it. And he did. He put it down.
Mendez cannot afford a third mistake. Just one glance by a Revolutionary Guard at the wrong moment, and they all go down.
During the delay, Tony could do essentially one thing to assuage the fears of the six, and that's be calm.
Those last 30 minutes in the waiting area seemed to drag on forever. Every minute passing very, very slowly.
When they glanced over at him, they couldn't see panic, they couldn't see fear, only the normal countenance, the rock, the steadiness.
If you could take your blood pressure at each different point along the line, it's probably pretty high.
This was kind of a draining experience going through the airport, and I just wanted to be on the aircraft at that stage. That was it.
Finally, at around 8:30 a.m., there's a second announcement.
Passengers for Swiss Air Flight 363 for Zurich, please approach the boarding gate.
Finally, they hear the announcement. Swiss Air flight is boarding.
We really felt good to actually getting on the bus, going out to the plane. That was beginning to feel that, well, maybe it's really going to work, it's really going to happen.
As they leave, there is no dramatic police chase along the runway. Flight 363 takes off without further incident. A few hours later, it lands in Zurich, Switzerland.
I wanted to say thank you and goodbye to Tony, but when I turned around, he was gone.
I'm not even sure we had a chance to shake hands with Tony and Julio. They went off, and for them it was just another day at the office, I guess, but obviously for us it was a life-changing experience.
Tony knows they're going on with their lives, but he knows that this is just one of many operations, and his primary objective at that point is drift off into the shadows.
The Argo escape plan is kept secret for 17 years. The files are eventually declassified, and the world would learn of one of the CIA's most extraordinary operations.
It's the secret story of how the CIA fooled everyone.
Argo is a perfect example of truth being stranger than fiction. I mean, it's hard to imagine that this is real. And I think that was the genius of Argo.
Beirut, 1985.
A car apparently packed with explosives blew up at the entrance to the embassy.
Terrorists are targeting Americans in a series of deadly attacks. Hundreds are dead, and now the CIA's top man in the Middle East has been taken hostage. William Casey, the head of the CIA, decides to throw out the rulebook and strike back.
He wanted to take revenge.
It was totally an off-the-books operation.
In a top-secret mission still denied by the American government, Casey allegedly sanctions the assassination of the man he believes is responsible for the attacks on Americans.
Bill Casey was convinced that Fadlallah was the force behind Hezbollah.
He determined this was a leading terrorist and they were going to get him.
And on March the 8th, 1985, the assassins strike.
It was a car bomb.
They took it into Fadlallah's neighborhood, hoping to kill him.
Based on briefings with the former head of the CIA, this is the top-secret story of the Beirut car bomb. 1983, Beirut, Lebanon. The capital of this tiny Middle Eastern country is being devastated by years of conflict. Now, American troops are arriving in the city. Their mission, not to invade, but to bring peace. Also in the city is a substantial CIA presence. Operating out of the US Embassy, the agents are there to counter a growing problem in Beirut: terrorism. A top-secret meeting has been called to discuss the threat. Chairing the meeting will be the CIA's top Middle East analyst, Robert Ames.
He is a man who was considered to be the key analyst of terrorist organizations and Middle East politics.
Bob Ames was probably the most knowledgeable person in the Middle East.
Ames had previously infiltrated the PLO and has been brought into Beirut secretly to advise on the terrorist threat. Also in the building that day is aid worker Ann Damerel.
When you work in an embassy, everyone knows that CIA agents are there. What you may not know is who they are.
As the classified CIA meeting is gathering, a white van is winding through the Beirut streets to the embassy.
Very few people saw what was coming. It was the calm before the storm.
The funny thing about living in Beirut when I was there, I never dreamt that I would be targeted.
It didn't look like a threat and kind of took everybody off guard.
The driver manages to enter the embassy compound's basement garage. The entire central section of the embassy building collapses in the explosion, bringing down 7 stories of masonry and rubble. Ann Damerel is one of those trapped beneath the wreckage.
I couldn't move anything. I heard, "Yalla bina, yalla bina," let's go, let's go. And I was aware that there were 4 young Lebanese near me. They made like a board, and they moved me out. And they started to run with me across the garden.
Anne's rescue is captured on video. She is one of the lucky ones. "200 people are wounded in the attack. 63 are killed, 17 of them American." News of the embassy bombing rocks America.
CBS Evening News, Dan Rather reporting. The U.S. Embassy in Beirut tonight is a floodlit scene of death and devastation. Much of the 7-story building is rubble, and in that rubble, possibly more victims of a massive terrorist car bomb. The Pentagon says 1 U.S. Marine and 2 U.S. Army soldiers are...
I'm a young Marine then, and I watched this on the news, and my thoughts were, wow, I'm on my way over there.
The embassy being bombed was definitely a shock. I don't think anybody had any idea the kind of defense an embassy really needed against the kind of bombs that could be put together, particularly when you have people willing to die delivering them.
This cowardly act has claimed a number of killed and wounded. It appears that there are some American casualties, but we don't know yet the exact number or the extent of injury.
For the CIA, it is a particularly devastating blow. Half the American dead worked for the agency.
If you look at it from the bomber's point of view, it was an enormous success. It wiped out the CIA station, killed Bob Ames.
His loss was devastating, and the director of the CIA said that Bob Ames was as close to an irreplaceable man as he had ever known in U.S. intelligence.
That director of the CIA is William Casey, and Casey is taking it personally.
Well, Casey obviously was a very intelligent guy. He was a risk taker, and that's different from being a gambler.
He was a very intimidating person if you were afraid of him. He was, had a very short temper. He didn't suffer fools lightly.
In many respects, he was a wild man. He had really no time for the moderates, you know, the make nice people.
Casey directs every CIA resource available to hunt down those responsible for the attack on the US Embassy.
Under CIA Director Casey, the CIA is probably more sophisticated than it ever had been in its history.
Analysts are charged with reviewing thousands of intercepts. Agents are ordered to go to their informants, and dozens of emergency meetings are called for senior CIA officials. But before Casey can get the enemy in his sights, they strike again. Their target? Over 1,800 American Marines stationed in Lebanon as peacekeepers.
The United States had made a decision to put its troops in Lebanon to help stabilize that country.
We were there acting as a liaison between the Lebanese government and the warring militias until the Lebanese government could get on their feet.
They weren't sent there to fight a war. They were to keep the peace. It was a peacekeeping mission.
The majority of the forces are based in barracks situated next to Beirut Airport.
From the rooftop of the building, we could see the main terminal and the mountains and the Mediterranean Sea to the right.
Their position is also dangerously close to an area of Beirut controlled by Muslim militias.
Where it was located was not a choice position for its security.
In the early hours, a truck heads out of Muslim-controlled Beirut on the airport road towards the barracks. At the same time, Marine Lance Corporal Kevin Jiggets is signing off from guard duty.
I went down to my room in the building, and I remember just taking off my boots and laying down.
As Jiggets lies down to sleep, the van approaches the perimeter of the barracks.
This truck came down Airport Road. He turned into the parking lot of the main terminal, and he crashed through a barbed wire barrier.
As a peacekeeping force, the Marines' weapons are not loaded. The face of the driver is visible to the guards as he aims the truck at the barracks. He is smiling.
It drove into this big building that was a barracks.
The initial contact with the truck and the guard shack is what woke me up.
The truck rams into the base of the barracks and is primed to explode.
And I reached for my weapon when I said, "It's showtime, ladies," and that's the last thing I remember.
It is the largest non-nuclear explosion since the Second World War.
Upon detonation, the building was lifted from its foundation and kind of pancaked down floor after floor.
The entire building is leveled.
We had never seen anything like this. It was an iconic bombing.
The truck was laden with approximately 12,000 pounds of explosives.
It was a pretty simple thing, a very large vehicle packed with explosives, got up to the front of the barracks and was exploded. It wasn't very complicated.
It was a beautifully done operation.
The next thing I remember was 2 white Marines were removing rubble from me. I didn't feel any pain until they picked me up.
Both of Jiggets' legs are broken, and he suffers burns and cuts over his entire body. All that remains of the 9-story building is rubble.
Prior to 9/11, it was the largest terrorist attack against U.S. personnel in the history of the United States.
241 American soldiers were killed. 240 of them were Marines.
It is the biggest single loss of American servicemen's life since Iwo Jima.
I know there are no words that can express our sorrow and grief over the loss of those splendid young men. Likewise, there are no words to properly express our outrage, and I think the outrage of all Americans at the despicable act.
In Washington, William Casey and the CIA are now under real pressure to find the terrorists. The problem is that no one has yet claimed responsibility. But within hours of the attack, a statement is released to a French news agency by a group calling themselves Islamic Jihad, Arabic for Holy War. The group say they are responsible for both the attack on the Marines and for another simultaneous attack in the city, which has claimed the lives of 58 French soldiers. But no one in Washington has ever heard of Islamic Jihad.
When the Islamic Jihad claimed the bombing, we knew absolutely nothing about it. It was not an organization that we even knew existed.
The CIA was caught completely off guard. We did not have the structure internally to handle that kind of threat.
We didn't know where it was, what it was. We didn't know who was behind it.
William Casey is determined that the CIA will find out and bring the perpetrators of this terrible crime to justice. And according to some, he will go beyond the law to do so. The man Casey selects to uncover those responsible is seasoned Middle East agent Robert Bayer. Anxious not to lose more operatives, Bayer's brief is simple.
When I left Washington, the orders were stay alive. Whatever you do, stay alive. We don't care if you ever send a report in. We don't care what you do. Just don't get killed or kidnapped. It was very simple orders.
Bayer sets off and finds Beirut a city in turmoil.
There was no other way in except a Black Hawk helicopter. We came in over the sea about 10 feet. The helicopter drops down so there's spray going everywhere. And you're coming in about 200 miles an hour. There's shelling. Parts of Beirut are burning. It was the ninth circle of hell.
Bayer and the other agents immediately begin to set up a low-profile operation.
This was Lebanon, you know? It was a civil war. You just absolutely wanted to be the least important person on the street. We didn't wear suits, always Levi's, scuff shoes. You never carried a radio in the open. You never carried a gun in the open. You looked like you were a bum that just sort of wandered off from wherever. We drove beat-up old cars with bullet holes in them, with bald tires. You know, if you change your car every day, that was the best way to do it. At one point, I actually drove a taxi there. It was an old Mercedes, was been painted a bunch of time, all dinged up, and it looked like what's called a service. There were just no limits, no laws. It was amazing. We had all the money we wanted. We would, at the drop of a hat, buy an apartment. I had probably 12 apartments and houses and moved between them night after night. So you were never in the same place.
As a fluent Arabic speaker, Bayer is assigned the role of gathering intelligence on the streets.
It was mainly picking up sources in cars, and we would put surveillance on places, watch people coming and going.
Gradually, Bayer's intelligence work starts to pay off. He begins to gather information on Islamic Jihad. And that intelligence leads him to the religious leaders of one of Lebanon's main Islamic sects, the Shias.
We knew that there was a grouping of Shia clerics that had started in 1982, and we watched this formation occur. You know, people would join and leave. Names we didn't know much about, but basically the religious establishment was coming to join in this Islamic resistance movement.
The Shia sect are in the minority in the Muslim world, But in Lebanon, they make up around half the Muslim population. And critically, they are the same branch of Islam as America's key enemy in the Middle East, Iran. Despite limitless CIA resources, Bayer's efforts to penetrate Islamic Jihad now hit a brick wall.
These people were very, very good. They never showed themselves. They worked out of tenements in Beirut. They didn't have a name, they didn't have an office, they didn't keep phone numbers.
What we began to find out was that they were very sophisticated in the structure of their organization, and in my opinion, they were almost as good as we are.
They were strictly family-based, impossible to penetrate.
So William Casey decides to turn to America's only friend in the region, Israel.
Israel is a very, very close ally, both politically and in intelligence areas, and so we work with them really as our intelligence and political brothers and sisters, really.
The Israeli intelligence service, Mossad, is conducting its own operations in Lebanon. Mossad pass on to Casey what they know. The Israeli report says that an organization inside Lebanon is involved. The Israelis identify a house in Damascus, the capital of neighboring Syria, where they say a Syrian intelligence officer discussed the attacks on the Marines 3 days before the bombing. Present at the meeting was a grandfatherly man with a black turban and brown robes. The Israelis say he is the key figure in the militant Shiite movement in Lebanon, Sheikh Mohammed Fadlallah.
The intelligence the CIA and the Israelis developed showed that Sheikh Fadlallah, a Shiite militant, was at the center and involved, allegedly, in at least the main bombings in Beirut, including the attack on the Marine barracks.
Fadlallah was born and raised in Iraq, but has spent his adult life in Lebanon. He is an open critic of America's presence in the region.
Mohammed Fadlallah naturally became a part of the anti-Western coalition, if you like. You know, he's an Ayatollah. He would give blanket fatwas saying, yeah, it's fine to use force to drive out an occupying power.
Casey becomes convinced that Fadlallah has to be connected to the bombings and is a leading figure in Islamic Jihad. At last, Casey has a target. According to some, Casey now sets in motion an operation to assassinate the man who he believes ordered the slaughter of hundreds of Americans. In the months after the barracks bombing, President Reagan reassures the world that America will stay the course.
The people of Lebanon must be given the chance to resume their efforts to lead a normal life, free from violence, without the presence of unauthorized foreign forces on their soil. And to this noble end, I rededicate the efforts of the United States.
But the truth is that neither the American military or the American people have any desire to be embroiled in another Vietnam.
The military decided that no longer were they going to let the politicians dribble them into a war, and a war that the public doesn't support.
I think the American public were sick of the killings.
But CIA Director William Casey is considering an operation against the Lebanese cleric Sheikh Mohammed Fadlallah, who he suspects is the leader of the terrorist organization behind the attacks on Americans. But before he can strike back, there is a further humiliation for America. Just 4 months after the bombing of the US Marines, America begins a full withdrawal of its forces from Lebanon. Many in the CIA believe it is sending the wrong message to the terrorists.
Pulling Marines out of Beirut was viewed as a victory by the bad guys, writ large.
It was sending a signal to terrorists in the region that the Reagan administration was a paper tiger.
Casey decides that it is up to the CIA to exact revenge for this loss of face.
Casey felt defeated because he was part of the administration that convinced Reagan to go in, to send the Marines in.
But to strike back, he must first rebuild the agency's damaged capabilities in Lebanon. Casey's first action is to send in a new station chief, William Buckley.
Buckley was a great man, a very solid fella. His expertise was in paramilitary operations.
Buckley, a former commando who had fought in Vietnam, will be the CIA's most important man on the ground in Beirut. Casey promises to provide Buckley with everything he needs to combat the terrorist threat posed by Islamic Jihad. Buckley steps up CIA paramilitary training, hostage rescue, and VIP protection. He trains Lebanese intelligence agents to work alongside his teams. Back at CIA headquarters in Langley, Casey has 50 highly trained analysts working exclusively on Islamic terrorism in the Middle East. Out of this massively expanded operation, Buckley and Casey learn a vital piece of intelligence.
It takes a lot of time to figure out what's going on. We figured that the Islamic Jihad was an organization that they just borrowed a name.
It emerges that Islamic Jihad is not a single body. It is the name for a loose network of Shiite militant groups. The CIA learns that just one of these groups is responsible for the attacks on American targets. That group will become one of the most dangerous and radical organizations to ever emerge from the Middle East. But in 1984, they are only just starting to refer to themselves by name. They call themselves the Party of God. In Arabic, Hezbollah.
Everybody talks about Hezbollah today. At the time, I never heard of Hezbollah.
In April 1983, we had no idea that there would be a Hezbollah. In fact, there was no name for it.
It is only now, after the bombings, that the group starts to use their notorious name. Hezbollah has been created by America's greatest enemy in the region, Iran. In 1982, its spiritual leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, had sent 1,000 Iranian Revolutionary Guards to train Shiite fighters in Lebanon.
Hezbollah was created by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. There's just no doubt about this. They funded it, they organized it.
And now Hezbollah is fighting Iran's war in Lebanon.
It was an extension of the Iranian Revolution, if you like. It was Iran's effort to open out the revolution to the Arab world. And they did it very successfully. And Lebanon was the first place.
The CIA discovers that Iran is training Hezbollah fighters on the Lebanese-Syrian border. Soon, they receive other vital intelligence. Both the Lebanese security forces and Israel's Mossad inform the CIA that a senior figure in the Hezbollah power structure is none other than Sheikh Mohammed Fadlallah. The same man who Casey believes is behind the attacks on the US Embassy and Marine barracks. Casey becomes convinced that the best way to strike at Hezbollah and send a clear signal to America's enemies is to kill Fadlallah. But Casey faces a complication. Targeted assassinations are against the law.
During Watergate, Gerald Ford, the president, issued an executive order banning assassinations by any agency, including the CIA. So in the 80s, Casey's hands were tied, and so he stretched the law.
In Washington, Casey turns to the CIA's formidable legal team to try to convince President Reagan to change the law. His argument is that a preemptive strike against Fadlallah should be seen as an act of self-defense.
In other words, if you'd gotten rid of Hitler in the 30s, maybe 20 million people wouldn't have died in World War II. And that's a pretty good argument.
Back in Beirut, William Buckley has a much more immediate problem to deal with. The terrorists have started taking hostages.
Hezbollah had started kidnapping individual Americans with a view to getting the United States out of the Middle East.
Groups of armed men are seizing Westerners, especially Americans, from the streets of Beirut. Casey realizes that the CIA needs to act. So Buckley starts formulating a daring rescue plan.
He wanted to set up paramilitary operations. He said, let's get people on the ground, let's get Delta Force there, we're going to rescue these people.
Buckley's plan is that the Green Berets and Israeli Special Forces will enter the city by boat under the cover of darkness. Simultaneously, in the city, Mossad agents will cause a diversion by placing bombs outside the homes of suspected Islamic terrorists. Then the Green Berets will make their way to a series of suspected locations and conduct stealth raids to rescue the hostages and take out the terrorists. Dangerous and daring though the plan is, Buckley believes that the very nature of such a surprise assault will be what ensures its success. On March the 15th, 1984, Casey gives Buckley the green light. But before he can put his plan into action, Hezbollah will strike again. And this time, the terrorists are coming after the CIA themselves. Since arriving in Beirut, Buckley has been having an affair with a beautiful young Lebanese woman called Zenoub. Unbeknown to Buckley, Zenoub works for Hezbollah. Monitoring every detail of Buckley's personal routine, she passes on the intelligence to the Hezbollah leadership.
Buckley was very predictable in his routine going to and from the embassy, and he was warned by a ranking military official to, look, stop doing that because you're putting yourself at risk.
Buckley ignores the warning, believing he is safe from attack and oblivious to Zenoub's true identity. On a Friday morning, William Buckley leaves his Beirut apartment carrying top-secret documents. Taking the elevator to the basement garage, he is joined by a well-dressed man. In the basement, the man suddenly strikes.
They hit him over the head with a briefcase with something hard in it. They grabbed him, threw him in the back of a trunk of a car, and drove off into the southern suburbs.
For Casey, the kidnapping of the Beirut station chief is an unprecedented disaster.
This was a real earthquake for Casey and the CIA.
William Buckley was a chief of station and had volumes of CIA information in his head, in his memory. And the accounts were that Hezbollah was torturing Buckley daily.
In September, proof that Buckley is still alive is released to the CIA by his
There appeared eventually a video that Casey saw of Buckley being tortured.
He was almost dead. He was slobbering. You could barely understand what he was saying. The concern was the amount of classified information that was being tortured out of Station Chief Buckley. It was causing serious damage to national security.
Buckley's Lebanese agents began to vanish or turn up dead. With the loss of their station chief and their intelligence network in Lebanon clearly compromised, Casey fears the agency's entire operation in the Middle East is in ruins.
It showed the limits of American power. The United States was not able to protect its intelligence representatives abroad. And Hezbollah was able to hold this man, and the United States apparently couldn't do anything about it.
For one of their own to be tortured and killed that way, and then for the video to get to Casey and the CIA, it galvanized this idea of we have to fight back, and if our hands are going to be tied, if there are rules, if there are laws, if there are executive orders, to hell with them, we're going to get the job done.
And any doubt that Casey may have about hitting back at the terrorists is removed when they strike yet again. A Hezbollah car bomb targets the US Embassy Annex building. 24 are killed and 90 are wounded. But this time, the CIA link the attack to Hezbollah. Casey turns to remarkable top-secret CIA aerial photographs, which show a van identical to the one used in the attack at a Hezbollah training camp in the Lebanese desert. The photographs reveal an exact mock-up of the protective concrete barriers at the embassy annex, and between the obstacles, tire tracks.
If they looked carefully enough, the outline of the drive that had to be made was exactly what you saw right in front of the United States Embassy Annex in Beirut.
It is beyond doubt. The Iranians are running a car bomb school for Hezbollah terrorists. In Washington, Casey makes his position clear. They must cut off the head of the Hezbollah snake and kill the man they believe to be its leader, Sheikh Fadlallah.
In November of 1984, President Reagan signed something called a finding. A finding is a document that means the president has found that a certain top secret activity is in the interests of national security.
The finding does not mean that the CIA can carry out assassinations, but it does mean that they can train local units who potentially can. This gives Casey some room for maneuver. Casey can now sanction the killing, but the CIA must still not be directly involved. Veteran journalist Bob Woodward claims that this is precisely what Casey does next.
It was totally an off-the-books operation. The CIA was not directly involved, though Casey himself personally was.
Covert action has always been available to presidents when they do not wish to use the United States military.
According to Woodward, Casey hunts for a third party to execute the assassination.
William Casey looked elsewhere to find a partner to launch a strike against the leadership of Hezbollah in Lebanon. And that partner was Saudi Arabia.
Although denied by Saudi Arabia and the American government, according to Woodward, in early 1985, the Saudi Arabian ambassador to the US, Prince Bandar, is ordered by his king to cooperate with Casey in every respect.
Casey and Bandar met in one of these classic CIA secret meetings at Bandar's house and walked out into the garden.
According to Woodward, the Saudis, like Casey, believe that Sheikh Fadlallah is the leader of Hezbollah, and so agree to fund the operation.
Casey gave Bandar a card with the bank account number and said, transferred the $3 million for this operation into this account.
Casey agrees to the Saudis taking operational control, and they agree to using a former British SAS officer to head the mission.
It was Saudi intelligence, a former SAS officer, and Casey, and they planned this operation.
The SAS officer arrives in Beirut. To keep the CIA out of the picture, he recruits Lebanese agents to carry out the mission.
The goal here was to get the Lebanese to do the work. Your boots on the ground, if you will, to try to find Hezbollah's leaders and deal with them.
The plan is simple: to strike at Fadlallah using the weapon of the terrorists.
You know, irony of ironies, made a car bomb.
One agent is ordered to procure a large quantity of explosives. Another is to choose the vehicle. Money is paid to informants to make sure that they know where Fadlallah will be at a certain time. The man chosen to drive the vehicle is Eli Habika, the leader of a Christian militia group. The bomb will be set off by a timed remote, which Habika will activate before leaving the scene. Everything is set. The team is given the green light, and the operation to kill Fadlallah is set in motion. A pickup truck is driven into the crowded Bir al-Abed neighborhood in South Beirut. Concealed beneath crates of vegetables, 750 pounds of explosives. The truck is parked across the road from Sheikh Fadlallah's house. Intelligence says that Fadlallah will soon be returning there from the mosque. Lookouts are positioned to alert the driver of the truck, Eli Habika, of Fadlallah's departure. At approximately 2 p.m., Fadlallah leaves the mosque after Friday prayers. One of the lookouts identifies Fadlallah, and the signal is relayed to Habika to prepare the bomb for detonation. But then a woman stops Fadlallah. She asks a religious question. They need to delay the detonation. Fadlallah is too far from the bomb. But it's too late. The blast kills 83 people. 283 lie wounded. The victims are mainly schoolgirls, women, and children. Buildings up to 600 feet away are destroyed. Despite the size of the explosion, the bombers have missed their target. Fadlallah is just outside the blast radius. Surrounded by his supporters, the cleric simply walks away.
They did not kill him. They killed 80 innocent people, and Fadlallah escaped.
Those at the scene are under no illusion as to who is behind the attack. At CIA headquarters, Casey receives word that the operation has gone horrifically wrong.
This bombing of Fadlallah was a turning point. I mean, anybody had any doubts about the West were immediately convinced that these guys are crazy. They're going to slaughter us and kill us all for no purpose at all.
And worse is to come. It later transpires that the CIA's intelligence on Fadlallah from Israeli and Lebanese sources is deeply flawed. the man the CIA had targeted for death, is not the head of Hezbollah. Over the next few years, the agency learns that Fadlallah has never been involved in any terrorist attacks against America.
There was no evidence, none, zero at all, that he was directly involved in attacks on the West or Israel. He was not an active operational member of Hezbollah, never at any time.
To this day, Prince Bandar and both the Saudi Arabian and American governments deny any involvement in the attempt on Fadlallah's life. They say that rogue Lebanese militias undertook the operation alone. And those who worked alongside Casey at the highest levels of the CIA also claim he was not involved.
I think a lot of people have ascribed it to something that Casey put together with whatever, and that's not true. Casey had nothing to do with it.
Despite these public denials, it appears that William Casey himself is prepared for the story of his personal involvement to go public. In the years before his death in 1987, Casey agrees to a series of interviews with award-winning reporter Bob Woodward.
I met with Casey and talked to him 48 times. I talked to him on the phone, traveled with him on his CIA plane when I was the only one with him, had dinner with him in his house, had breakfast with him in his house.
Woodward eventually reveals Casey's involvement in the botched assassination attempt in his book, Veil: The Secret Wars of the CIA.
Now, why Casey would tell Bob Woodward this story, I don't know.
I think Casey talked to Woodward quite openly to leave a legacy behind and let people know what he wanted them to know.
Over the years, there has been speculation as to why Casey would talk to Woodward. Many people believe it was because Casey wanted to ensure that the CIA would learn from its mistakes in Beirut.
We underestimated our enemy in that case, and it came back to bite us.
Prior to 9/11, the terrorist attack on the Marine compound in 1983 was the largest terrorist attack against Americans in the history of the United States.
Because of intelligence failures in 1983, hundreds of Americans, including 241 Marines, lost their lives. It is a loss that many refuse to forget.
Beirut lives in the hearts of Beirut veterans because there's not been a day that's gone by that I don't think about it and I don't remember it.
Casey, too, was adamant that the deaths of the Marines, the CIA agents, and embassy staff who died in the previous bombing would not be in vain. The CIA desperately needed to employ more effective tactics against the extremists.
Casey figured out that we had to do something better about combating terrorism.
The critical lesson that Casey learned was that the CIA needed to find ways of getting better intelligence on its enemies and finding more accurate ways of killing them. So a year after the Fadlallah attack, Casey sets up a new CIA department, the Counterterrorism Center.
It brought together the espionage people and the people from the Directorate of Intelligence to work together for virtually the first time in history. And this was a revolution.
This revolution at the agency ensures that, unlike in Beirut, the CIA will now always try to have its own agents on the ground, providing highly accurate intelligence direct to the CIA's best analysts. They will no longer need to repeat the mistakes of Beirut, where they were forced to rely on foreign intelligence and local Lebanese to carry out their missions. In 1986, the Counterterrorism Center starts developing a new way to accurately target its enemies: an unmanned aerial vehicle.
That was the beginning of where we are today with the lethal drones. That was the genesis right there.
This idea, born out of a failure of such tactics as the car bomb, would result in the development of highly sophisticated, lethal drones. It would take a generation to be perfected, but drones are now an integral and highly effective weapon in the CIA's campaign against terrorism.
It is a new era, and if you think about what Casey was dabbling in with Sheikh Fadlallah, it's small change compared to what goes on now.
The CIA continues to evolve in the face of new terrorist threats and has achieved some startling successes. In many cases, the extent of those successes are only now becoming declassified. May 1st, 2011, 30 minutes after midnight. In military terms, 0 dark 30. Navy SEALs are on a top-secret mission. Their target, America's most wanted, Osama bin Laden. This night brings to a close the biggest manhunt ever known.
I don't think the CIA or the military had any idea that how difficult it would be to apprehend this guy.
Yet what the movies tell us about the CIA's manhunt is not the full story.
Between May of '98 and May of '99, we had 2 opportunities to capture him and 8 different opportunities to kill him.
We hear from the covert team who tracked bin Laden down.
You know you're fighting against time, and you know that people are going to die.
To reveal the declassified truth behind the 15-year pursuit that brought America's most wanted to justice. A Friday morning in New York. Thousands of people are downtown. But this is a day unlike any other. Because the hunt for the world's most wanted man begins now. Terrorists attack the World Trade Center.
We heard a tremendous explosion. The entire building shook.
But this is not 9/11. It's 8 years earlier. A 1,500-pound truck bomb rips a 100-foot hole through 4 levels of World Trade Center Tower 1. The blast is designed to topple one 110-story tower into the other, potentially killing tens of thousands of people. It has failed. But 6 are dead, and the injured number more than 1,000. At first, no one has any idea who could have executed such an attack. Years of investigation reveal those responsible are from a terrorist organization called Al-Qaeda. Little is known about them. This is their very first strike outside a Muslim nation.
It helped to put Al-Qaeda on the map. What it helped to do most of all was to convince at least the intelligence community that a threat within the United States could involve more than just a shooting or a kidnapping.
At the CIA, an order comes in from President Clinton. Find out everything there is to know about this new terror group. Senior analyst Mike Scheuer is instructed to head up a small team dedicated to the task.
I was fortunate enough to be appointed the chief in late 1995, and we set up and began operations in December of 1995.
Scheuer assigns his new unit a code name, Alex Station, named after his then 2-year-old son. Alex Station is a first, unlike any other unit in the CIA, because it's dedicated to just one single mission: tracking down a man they suspect is Al-Qaeda's leader, Osama bin Laden.
It was a very different organization. It was the first time we were set up with a significant amount of manpower and funding to look at one person.
The team sets up at the CIA headquarters. Shoya's recruitment ad has unexpected results.
It was women who came forward to be interviewed who applied for the jobs. Even when we were very small, when we had 10 or 12 people, probably 7 or 8 of them were women.
Cindy Storer, an expert on Afghanistan, works with Alex Station from the very beginning.
I was the communication with the policymakers, including the president, about what's going on in the world that relates to terrorism. The idea of the Counterterrorist Center was that your analysts and your operations officers being in the same place, having access to the same information, literally being able to talk over the cubicles to each other. So there was a lot of synergy.
Very quickly, Shoya's close-knit female team builds a special rapport.
We got very close. I mean, these are my sisters in arms.
On the inside, they earn the nickname, the Sisterhood, and a reputation for excellence.
Women were extraordinary. It's only half jokingly. Usually I say, you know, if I could have, I would have put a sign up that said, "No men need apply."
From the very beginning, the CIA's mission was clear. Understand bin Laden and decide if he's a real threat to the United States. They start by methodically trawling the CIA's existing database. Very quickly, a picture unfolds.
We found out we had a great deal of information, particularly about bin Laden's family and its influence within Saudi Arabia and its economic power and geographic reach.
The database reveals bin Laden is the son of a Saudi billionaire. But then at the age of 22, something happens that shapes his future. The Soviet Union invades Afghanistan. Like thousands of young Muslim men, Osama bin Laden travels across the globe to support the Afghan Mujahideen freedom fighters.
He showed up as sort of the representative of his very, very wealthy family, visiting clinics, visiting wounded Mujahideen, writing checks for their families.
It's the height of the Cold War, and America and the Mujahideen share a common enemy.
We didn't pay an extraordinary amount of attention to him because he was on the side of the angels at that time. He was killing Soviets.
But then Alex Station's sisterhood uncovers something alarming. Bin Laden is not like most Afghan freedom fighters. He's gaining his own followers and taking things a step further.
There's this group of Arabs out there, and they're not like the rest of the Afghan resistance. You know, if you go down this road and you're not welcome there, they shoot before they ask questions. They attack aid workers. And then you start to hear these stories about who's involved. Well, bin Laden's there.
Declassified documents reveal that from around 1985, bin Laden goes from freedom fighter to terrorist. He begins to fund terror cells in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan. By 1993, he funds New York's World Trade Center bomb and is thrown out of both Saudi Arabia and the Sudan. In 1996, the Sisterhood trace him to Afghanistan. Here, he pairs up with an extremist regime, the Taliban. They support his radical views and provide a safe haven for his terrorist funding operations.
But the question was he just the financier, or was he involved operationally?
In less than a year, the Alex Station team would find out. They have some extraordinarily good luck. What they call a walk-in, an insider from a training camp in Sudan, simply walks into the American embassy, ready to talk.
He turned out to be an extraordinarily important individual in telling us about how Al-Qaeda was organized, how it was financed, how it acquired weaponry, that it was looking for biological and nuclear types of weapons.
What the walk-in tells them moves Osama bin Laden beyond financier. He's instigating missions of his own, organizing training regimes and writing handbooks for bombings and assassinations. He's selecting teams to plant bombs on planes, even to crash small aircraft into the CIA's own headquarters. And it's bin Laden himself who comes up with the name Al-Qaeda, Arabic for the base.
Calling it Al-Qaeda in a way, I mean, is indicative of his sort of ambition. He calls it, this is the base, this is an organization. It has a system wherein fighters can arrive through Pakistan or through Afghanistan and find their way to the fight. There's a pipeline. And he is largely responsible for putting that sort of structure in place.
Shoya's team have uncovered something truly alarming. Osama bin Laden has a master plan. From his refuge in Afghanistan, he's setting up Terrorism Incorporated to turn violent jihad into a global phenomenon.
We were very sure that Al-Qaeda was an organization the like of which we had never seen before in terms of manpower, focus, discipline, and geographic reach.
Then, as if to leave no doubt, in August 1996, 5 years before 9/11, bin Laden officially declares war on America.
It was not rocket science to figure out that this man was deadly serious. He was telling us, we're coming after you.
We knew they were planning a big attack, but we didn't know where, what, or where.
Alex Station decides they have to make the first move. And in May 1998, an opportunity arrives. The Sisterhood team gains reliable intelligence on Osama bin Laden's whereabouts. They prepare a plan to capture him. The plan requires President Clinton's approval. Despite the CIA warning of a growing threat from Al-Qaeda, the president gets cold feet.
We had had an opportunity to kidnap Osama bin Laden in May of 1998, and the policymakers turned it down because they were afraid he would die and we would be blamed for assassination. At least that was their reason at the time.
The CIA see this as a missed opportunity, but the White House is simply not prepared to risk an international incident. The Sisterhood are reduced to warning President Clinton it's just a matter of time before bin Laden strikes. And strikes big. Suicide bombers drive a 2,000-pound truck bomb into the American embassy. 212 people are dead. Around 4,000 wounded are trapped within the rubble. Less than 10 minutes later, over 400 miles away, another explosion at an American embassy is timed to maximize the chaos. Here, 11 people die. A further 85 are injured. Al-Qaeda claims responsibility for both attacks. But the worst is yet to come. Bin Laden himself has declared this is just the beginning. At the CIA, there's frustration.
I remember the week before the bombings in '98, I had written something just internal talking about what I thought was Al-Qaeda's ability to do multiple simultaneous attacks, just as a way of giving some sense of what kind of threat we might be facing. And I got this, response back. You can't say that. There's no way you can say that. You don't have any evidence for that. Of course, I had tons of evidence for it. It's just that the people who were the establishment, so to speak, they didn't look at that evidence. We knew we were 10 years behind on following this issue. I mean, we could feel it, and we were playing catch up all the time.
The Sisterhood try to pick up the trail, but bin Laden knows he is a hunted man. After the Africa bombings, everything goes quiet. Bin Laden simply disappears.
After the bombings of the embassies, they became much more security conscious. Not staying too long in any one place, sending out 2 or 3 convoys going in different directions. So it became increasingly hard over the years to really pin down his location.
Osama bin Laden, from the beginning, was going to be a difficult target to go after. He was a practiced clandestine operator.
He was quite good at hiding. He stops communicating by cell phone or by phone call. He relies on this network of couriers. He's basically communicating in a medieval way, almost, to protect himself.
In Kenya, the Sisterhood turned to their informants. Just 2 weeks after the Africa bombings, their efforts pay off. The informants reveal that bin Laden is heading towards a maze of Al-Qaeda training camps at a town called Host.
We developed intelligence from several sources that bin Laden was going to travel from Kandahar city to Host. And he was going to meet with Pakistanis and various other kind of Islamist fighters there.
This time, President Clinton agrees to go after bin Laden. He gives the go-ahead for a massive missile strike. Codename Operation Infinite Reach.
Today, I ordered our armed forces to strike at terrorist-related facilities in Afghanistan and Sudan. Our target was terror. Our mission was clear: to strike at the network of radical groups affiliated with and funded by Osama bin Laden, perhaps the preeminent organizer and financier of international terrorism in the world today.
Dozens of Al-Qaeda terrorists are killed. But what about bin Laden?
As it turned out, the information we had was good, but bin Laden at the last moment decided to go to Kabul, and we, of course, missed him.
To the CIA, it's a huge blow. And it takes another 9 months before Shoya's Sisterhood team can pick up bin Laden's trail again. This time, the intelligence on his location is much more precise. The Sisterhood learn the exact dates bin Laden is staying at a home in Kandahar, in southern Afghanistan. They're confident this time he won't escape a hit. A mission request is put to the president.
3rd week of May in 1999, for example, for 5 consecutive nights we knew what building he was staying in Kandahar, and yet they chose not to shoot.
President Clinton pulls the operation. The Kandahar home is next to a mosque. Innocent worshippers may be injured. Clinton is not prepared to risk international condemnation. An internal CIA email sent by Mike Shoya states he is sure they'll regret not acting.
The common sense part was a little bit offended, I think, in that we had a man who declared war on us in 1996, wasn't sure that we heard him, did it again in February of 1998, and we still had a government that was really paying no attention.
The CIA continues to place mission plans in front of the president.
Between May of 98 and May of 99, we had 10 opportunities. 2 opportunities to capture him and 8 different opportunities to use the U.S. military, either through missiles or fixed-wing aircraft to kill him. But we had 10 opportunities.
Each time, White House advisors assess them as simply too risky to act upon, but the Alex Station team aren't about to give up. Using surveillance drones and voice recognition software, the Sisterhood track bin Laden down once more. He's at a notorious training camp near Kandahar in Afghanistan. The camp offers training in constructing bombs and in assassination techniques. Jihadis are being prepared to serve as suicide bombers. Some sent around the world to enroll in commercial flight training. Something big is being planned. This time the Sisterhood are determined to get the president to act. They assure him there will be no risk of collateral damage. Because now the CIA has a new weapon in their armory. A high-tech, remotely operated drone that's armed. They plan to guide a precision bomb into the heart of bin Laden's lair. The president gives the go-ahead. But it's winter. And the weather is now so hostile in Afghanistan that the operation must be put on hold until spring. But before then, matters are taken out of the CIA's hands. A new president is sworn in. And George W. Bush has a different focus.
Mr. Bush, and to some extent all of the presidents since Mr. Reagan, were brought up in the Cold War era.
They always come into office with a worldview and they're going to accomplish certain things. And then you hit them with something that they had no idea about. And really not many people had an idea about it. And they've somehow got to integrate that into their presidency. That is not easy at all. It takes at least 10 years to get people to come around to understanding that you have a new problem.
They had a very hard time thinking that a 6'4" skinny Saudi who wore a turban and ate goat in the desert could be a threat to the United States. When they were lining up threats to consider, they thought about China and Russia and Iran and narcotics, not this goofy Saudi. And we were crippled to some extent by our view of terrorism at that time.
Despite multiple warnings from multiple security agencies requesting action, none are able to pinpoint an immediate or specific threat. Without this information, the Bush administration feels it can't justify taking bin Laden out. It refuses to reauthorize the CIA's proposed drone strike. In the spring of 2001, bin Laden, now in his 6th year of hiding, once again slips through Alex Station's grasp. As the tone of the intelligence chatter the team is monitoring takes a dramatic turn.
And then we started to see something that was clearly something else. And the chatter, we were hearing things like Armageddon, and you know you're fighting against time, and you know that people are going to die.
Every morning, 6 days a week, the CIA briefs the president on matters of national security.
If you see this disaster coming, you want to try to stop it.
By the summer of 2001, Shoya's team are briefing that a significant attack is being planned on home soil. But they can't be more specific than that.
So at the time, they really just wanted to know who's going to blow me up when, and can we stop it in time, right? And unfortunately, that's the thing that you almost can never do.
You had the Alex Station, this bin Laden unit, working away, at trying to find bin Laden. But it was also regarded by many inside the agency as this odd collection of fanatics who were so preoccupied with an individual who didn't deserve that much attention. I think there was a lot of skepticism at the time over whether that effort was really worth it, and whether their view of his significance was out of whack, was imbalanced.
It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. You know, it was the best in that you're working with an equally dedicated group of people who are doggedly determined, and you really have to have that bulldog mentality. You're going to shake it until you get the answers, right? But it was also the worst in that, you know, you're trying to explain to people a new emerging issue that completely violates all of their mindsets.
Somehow, they have to convince the president to act. The CIA director requests a non-scheduled meeting with the president. Instead, he gets National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice. He advises her to go on a war footing immediately. A month later, security analysts meet with the president at his vacation home in Texas. The now declassified president's daily brief reveals the CIA think bin Laden's supporters may already be in the US, plotting an attack. Without a precise who, where, or when, President Bush feels there's no target he can strike. Senior national security advisors meet for a briefing. They too see no precise information they can act upon. It's a Tuesday morning in New York. Thousands are working, visiting, shopping at the jewel and the crown of the business district, the World Trade Center. Hijacked American Airlines Flight 11 strikes between the 93rd and 99th floors of World Trade Center Tower 1. The damage destroys all means of escape above the impact zone. 1,344 people are trapped. All will die. It's 17 minutes after the first impact. The second plane strikes the south tower between the 77th and 85th floors. Two more planes are hijacked. One hits the Pentagon. The other crashes before it reaches its Washington target. In under an hour, nearly 3,000 people are dead. It's the worst terrorist atrocity in US history, and the kind of tragedy the CIA have been warning of since the manhunt began. Now the search for bin Laden will be kicked into a high gear.
But, you know, at that time, most of us really didn't know what Al-Qaeda was. If you had asked us, you know, who runs Al-Qaeda, what is Al-Qaeda, where is Al-Qaeda, we would have been hard-pressed to answer all of those questions on that day. It changed dramatically, you know, so quickly for us.
At Alex Station, they feel the frustration of having seen it all coming.
When those planes hit on 9/11, we had known they were going to do that, not that specific day or that specific target, but that medium of operation. The plan they had for sending Arabs to the United States to be trained for driving 747s into U.S. facilities. They intended to do that since at least 1995.
The Sisterhood feel a terrible sense of responsibility for not being able to prevent the tragedy.
I think looking back, it's easy to forget that in the fall of 2001, America had suffered the equivalent of a national nervous breakdown. That the eyes and ears of the American eagle, the first line of defense against terrorism, the first line of the war against Al-Qaeda, had failed to protect America.
Within days, President Bush makes his feelings known.
I want justice. And
There's an old poster out west, as I recall, that said, "Wanted, dead or alive."
It marks a crucial turning point in the relationship between the Bush administration and the CIA's bin Laden team.
After 2001, Osama bin Laden became the most wanted man in human history. No one has been pursued by so many people as Osama bin Laden was.
The world turned upside down on 9/11. I mean, the next day it was anything you want from Congress, from everywhere, anything you want, request whatever you want. We took whole branches from other parts of the agency and expanded rapidly by a factor of like 7.
And very quickly, the CIA develops a plan. The war on terror roars into life. Operation Enduring Freedom is the invasion of Afghanistan. The aim? To overthrow the Taliban regime and flush out Osama bin Laden. It's the first time in American history a war has been launched explicitly to take down a terrorist organization. At the vanguard of the fight, with the Special Forces, are highly trained covert CIA operatives. As bin Laden's supporters, the Taliban, fall, undercover CIA agents intercept communications. Bin Laden is traced to the remote caves of Tora Bora along Afghanistan's mountainous eastern border. US Special Forces and a crack team of CIA Special Operations paramilitaries have bin Laden cornered.
We were so close to bin Laden in the last days of 2001. We could hear him on his radio. We knew that he was a mile, 2 miles away.
But the US military takes a strategic decision. An act of diplomacy. They allow their Afghan allies to take the lead in capturing bin Laden and hand over responsibility to 2 local commanders. It's a move the CIA's Alex station warns against.
We did the traces on the names of the Afghan commanders for our people who were in the field. And we found out that both of them had fought alongside of Osama bin Laden against the Soviets. So what we did was say simply to the military, here's the guys you picked, here's their records, here's their associations, they're not going to do what you want.
The CIA is proved right. The Afghan commanders allow Osama bin Laden to disappear across the lawless border with Pakistan.
We didn't know whether this man was in Pakistan or Pennsylvania. He was gone, missing in action.
I don't think the CIA or the military had any idea that how difficult it would be to apprehend this guy.
With bin Laden on the run, the White House begins to shift priorities. Resources are diverted to the war looming in Iraq and away from the hunt for bin Laden.
President Bush would start to talk about, well, wherever he is, he's on the run, he's hiding in a cave, he doesn't matter. Which wasn't true. Of course he mattered.
After 2001 was when we took our eye off the ball. We began chasing other bad guys in another desert in Iraq and didn't give the priority we needed to the hunt for Osama bin Laden.
For the CIA's sisterhood, the next few years are the lost years. Bin Laden is now so skilled in tradecraft that there are few good leads. He even taunts the CIA, releasing video recordings from mystery locations. With little new progress, in late 2005, the CIA closes down Alex Station altogether.
There were a lot of knives out for it organizationally that it was a source of heartburn for a lot of traditional people. And frankly, it offended a lot of the old boys that so many women were involved. One of the chiefs of the Counterterrorism Center called them the Manson family because he thought they were too obsessed and too dedicated. There was a large degree of animosity directed at some of those women simply because they were women.
There is now only minor support for the pursuit of America's most wanted. But a change of administration will bring greater resources and a renewed focus in the hunt for Osama bin Laden. The CIA's director receives a memo from the new president, Barack Obama. Bring Osama bin Laden to justice.
From the day he came into office, in January 2009, he told his national security team, and especially his director of Central Intelligence, Leon Panetta, your most important responsibility is to find Osama bin Laden and either capture or kill him.
The CIA assembles a team of experts, many other women of the original sisterhood. They dust off the files and get to work. They start by reanalyzing why they'd been unsuccessful in tracking him down before. They realize they can't trace bin Laden's phone conversations or emails because he had abandoned all electronic communication. But then, the CIA team have a breakthrough. What if they can turn bin Laden's strength into his weakness?
We knew he didn't communicate electronically, therefore he had to have a courier. And if you started to figure out who that courier might be and look around the people who'd been with bin Laden all his life and who were still alive, then you narrowed it down to a relatively small number of potential figures.
The team has a mission. To find bin Laden, they have to first identify his courier, then track him down. In Afghanistan, CIA operatives interview every potential source of information in their custody. At top-secret black sites the world over, they interrogate every high-value prisoner. And in Camp Delta at the Guantanamo Bay Naval Base in Cuba, every inmate with a link to bin Laden is questioned. Nobody can or will reveal the courier's name. But then the analysts begin to notice a pattern. Many high-level prisoners are at pains to downplay the significance of one name in particular. A man they refer to as Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti. The CIA begins to think the prisoners are downplaying this man for a reason. Perhaps al-Kuwaiti is highly significant after all. A CIA team on the ground in Pakistan intercepts al-Kuwaiti's calls. They track him to a small town of Abbottabad, home to an elite Pakistani military academy, and just 30 miles north of the capital, Islamabad.
It was a relatively simple matter of following him until sooner or later you began to detect a pattern of behavior.
Al-Kuwaiti's behavior patterns are strange. He's behaving like a man who doesn't want to be followed, retracing his steps, using his phone only in certain areas. To the CIA surveillance team, they're classic signs of tradecraft, and exactly how they'd expect bin Laden's courier to act. But they can't tell for sure. The surveillance team have to dig into al-Kuwaiti's past. Local sources confirm that in 2004, Al-Kuwaiti buys land on the outskirts of Abbottabad. He commissions an architect to build $1 million two-story compound for a family of 12. It's the sprawling one-acre complex they see him visit.
Very high walls, very difficult to see in.
But Al-Kuwaiti is not wealthy and does not have a large family. And there's more.
It had no electrical signature, there was no internet, there was no telephone system.
A third story of the building isn't even on the original plans. Its design makes the CIA analysts suspicious.
It was self-sufficient, it grew much of its own food, it destroyed its own garbage. It was a safe haven, a sanctuary.
To the CIA, the compound's residents were going to extraordinary lengths to hide something. They begin to wonder if the something the residents are hiding is the man the CIA have been tracking for over a decade and a half, Osama bin Laden. The team on the ground also knows the White House won't act without a positive identification of bin Laden. They try every surveillance trick they know to catch a glimpse of the man in the compound, but get nowhere.
Even after the CIA followed the couriers to that compound, his security was still so sound that they never got a glimpse of him. And it was mainly because of his willingness, the discipline that he showed in not ever being on the internet and sending messages out, not ever making cell phone calls, not venturing outside this compound.
After weeks of round-the-clock surveillance, the CIA's dedication pays off. A tall man is spotted, walking in the walled kitchen garden. Bin Laden is 6'4". The man doesn't stay outside for long and is careful to shelter under a tarpaulin. It's as if he knows not to expose himself to spy satellites or drones.
They called him the pacer at the CIA because they only saw this sort of tall, shadowy figure pacing behind this wall.
Despite the mounting circumstantial evidence, the CIA cannot positively identify the mystery man. Even so, they decide to take their findings to President Obama.
There was significant uncertainty in the CIA and in the White House over whether they were going to find him there. And the degree of uncertainty depended on who you asked. You know, they sort of went around the table in these national security meetings, and senior officials would put different numbers on it. It would range anywhere from 50% to 90%. Nobody thought that the odds were 100%.
The best the CIA could say to the president was it's 55-45, that Osama bin Laden is in this compound. This was the only real lead we'd had on Osama bin Laden. He could have been hiding on the moon as far as the American intelligence community knew.
President Obama weighs the odds and gives the CIA permission to plan a raid. Now, more than ever, the CIA needs a surefire plan. Crucially, they need a plan that takes into account the pacer may not be bin Laden after all. A bombing mission is ruled out. Forensic evidence to prove the mystery man's identity would be vaporized. They need eyes on to confirm the pacer's identity face to face. There is only one real option. They propose a helicopter raid involving the best of the Special Forces, SEAL Team 6. It's a daring proposal. The CIA takes their plan to President Obama.
What he was presented with was an opportunity to do what Mr. Clinton should have done 10 times, what Mr. Bush had a chance to do once.
You know, these CIA officials could argue, well, this may be the best chance we have. Do you remember these other chances that we had that we passed on before the September 11 attacks? Do you want to be the president who passes on this chance? And that's a pretty compelling argument.
President Obama gives the go-ahead. 15 years after the manhunt began, a date for the raid to capture or kill Osama bin Laden is set. May the 1st, 2011. Codename, Operation Neptune Spear. Two dozen members of Navy SEAL Team 6 are temporarily transferred to the CIA's command. No one officially designated as military will cross into Pakistani airspace. The White House does not want to trigger a war with Pakistan. At 2300 hours, the SEALs' stealth Black Hawk helicopters take off. Destination, the Abbottabad compound in Pakistan. The target, Osama bin Laden, America's most wanted. A man who has eluded the CIA for over a decade and a half. There is no turning back. Navy SEAL Team 6 are about to touch down in the compound. It's 0 dark 30, a military term for 30 minutes past midnight. Just as they're preparing to fast rope down to the compound, one of the pilots hits serious trouble and loses lift. To save his crew and the mission, the pilot pulls off a daring emergency landing. Instantly, the SEALs adapt their mission plan. They storm the compound from the ground. The first SEAL team encounter bin Laden's courier. A second SEAL team find the courier's brother and his wife. Inside, a man identified as Osama bin Laden's son is also killed. On the 3rd floor of the main building, the SEALs encounter the man the CIA call the Pacer. Five seconds later, the team leader radios a message. Geronimo, the code word for bin Laden. EKIA, enemy killed in action. Osama bin Laden is dead.
Good evening. Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda, and a terrorist who's responsible for the murder of thousands of innocent men, women, and children.
From touchdown to mission completion, the 38 minutes in the Abbottabad compound draws to a close the most extensive and expensive manhunt in history. For the CIA's Mike Scheuer, it's been a long journey, but one ending in victory.
I was, of course, delighted that he was dead. He was a very serious enemy of the United States.
And it's a victory, too, for the sisterhood team Scheuer first set up in 1995, 6 years before 9/11.
We achieved all of the things that we were assigned to do. Not to my credit, but to the credit of the officers who worked for me, because they were truly extraordinary at what they do.
The determination of the CIA analysts' painstaking scrutiny of 15 years of intelligence gathering finally pays off to bring Osama bin Laden to justice. A fortress in Afghanistan. 1 month after 9/11. Two operatives from the CIA's Elite Special Activities Division are hot on the trail of Osama bin Laden.
Those first teams were going into the wildest Wild West.
This is the declassified story of how the CIA with elite special forces put down a Taliban uprising, outnumbered 100 to 1.
It's like a scene from Armageddon.
We hear from the people on the ground as it happened and reveal their footage from the heat of the battle.
What's happening? There's a prison uprising.
Caught in the crossfire, the CIA makes a discovery for which one operative pays the ultimate price. America is under attack. Acting on orders from Osama bin Laden, teams of hijackers fly aircraft into New York's World Trade Center. Two more planes are hijacked. One hits the Pentagon. The other crashes before it reaches its Washington target. In under an hour, nearly 3,000 people are dead. It's the worst terrorist atrocity in US history. The nation is in shock.
The United States had been caught so off guard by the September 11 attacks, it just seemed inconceivable that two gigantic towers and in the nation's capital could come under attack by this ragtag group of terrorists from across the world. It was not hard to conceive that there were other attacks underway.
President Bush speaks to the nation and to the world.
Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice.
The full operational force of the CIA now focuses on one man and his network of terrorists.
Finding bin Laden was a priority from the outset. The head of the Counterterrorism Center for the CIA talked about bringing home bin Laden's head on a pike.
The world turned upside down on 9/11. I mean, the next day it was anything you want from Congress, from everywhere, anything you want, request whatever you want. And we took whole branches from other parts of the agency and expanded rapidly by a factor of like 7.
Well, Osama bin Laden from the beginning was going to be a difficult target to go after. He was a practiced clandestine operator.
The CIA knows bin Laden is hiding in Afghanistan. He's found refuge with the Taliban, the ruling extremist Islamic regime. But they don't know his precise location. Even so, very quickly, they develop a plan. Intelligence-driven warfare. For the very first time in American history, President Bush approves a plan using the CIA as a lead element in a war. Operation Enduring Freedom is the invasion of Afghanistan. The aim? To overthrow the Taliban regime and flush out Osama bin Laden. In a matter of just weeks, the Taliban are in a full-scale retreat. Thousands are captured by America's allies, the Afghan Northern Alliance. On the ground from the very beginning are highly trained covert CIA operatives. They've been sent in to interrogate captives and gain information on exactly where bin Laden is hiding. Just 10 weeks into the war, CIA analysts learn of an opportunity. A chance for their men to interrogate individuals who could potentially lead them to their #1 target. 85 miles outside the northern Afghan town of Kunduz, Taliban fighters have assembled on the road to Mazar-e-Sharif. Their leaders want to negotiate a truce.
Now, these guys were fully armed. They had with them AK-47s, PKM light machine guns, rocket-propelled grenades. They had all the normal armaments that the Taliban and Al-Qaeda had.
These men are not just Afghans. There are also hundreds of foreign fighters.
Now, what kind of fighters are drawn to an international jihad from overseas? They are, by their very nature, the most extreme, because to do that you have to have some kind of extreme commitment to come and fight in a foreign land.
At the CIA headquarters, analysts receive intelligence that many of these hardline foreigners are in fact members of Al-Qaeda. Some may be high-ranking commanders. Some may even know where bin Laden is hiding. The CIA decides to send in specialist interrogators. So they turn to an exceptional unit, the CIA's experts in operating in hostile zones, the Special Activities Division. Outside the city of Mazar-e-Sharif, a two-man Special Activities Division team prepares for their mission. Dave Tyson is a Central Asian specialist. He is a fluent speaker of Dari, the language of America's ally, the Northern Alliance. With him, Johnny Michael Spann, Mike, a 32-year-old former Marine from Alabama. He's been with the CIA for 3 years. This is his first field assignment.
So those first teams that were going into the wildest Wild West that you can imagine. If they got into a firefight with the Taliban, there was no cavalry going to come in. They were on their own at the tippiest tip of the spear of American power.
The team's mission? To persuade the surrendering fighters to reveal precisely where bin Laden is hiding. At the same time, just a few miles away, the foreign fighters are taken to Kalajangi, a sprawling, mud-walled 19th century fort in the desert a few hours west of the city of Mazar-e-Sharif. The fort is 600 meters across, with massive walls 20 meters thick and 30 meters high. Inside are two enclosed compounds, separated by a dividing wall. To the north is the Northern Alliance headquarters building. To the south, the so-called Pink House. And nearby lies the armory. Despite its size, there is still nowhere truly suitable to house such a huge influx of men.
You need a large building, large enough to hold and process and house and feed 600 men, and you need somewhere which you can secure them in. They didn't have any prisons, obviously. What alternatives were there?
Northern Alliance guards have little choice but to herd the Taliban into the basement of the Pink House, the building in the middle of the compound. This will be their makeshift prison. But the foreign Taliban become restless. After the truce, they had expected to be able to walk free. To To these hardline jihadis, imprisonment comes as a shock. Their frustrations wouldn't matter but for one thing. Their Northern Alliance guards have failed to confiscate all the prisoners' weapons and grenades.
In Afghan tradition and in Muslim culture as well, if somebody says they are surrendering, you are supposed to take that at face value. This is supposed to be an honourable thing. So in the old tradition, they weren't searched, they were processed into the fort very quickly, and a lot of these guys had weapons hidden under their clothing.
They're still armed and dangerous, as one Taliban fighter quickly shows.
I don't know the mentality of those Taliban fighters, but I guess it's an attitude of, okay, I surrender, I make myself defenseless, but maybe not utterly defenseless. Shall I keep something just in case? And that's probably when one of them, or some of them, decided to use the grenades that they had hidden.
The explosion is the last action of one Taliban fighter's life. A warning of what the Taliban are capable. As a result, inside their underground prison, the fighters develop a plan. They outnumber their Northern Alliance guards by 5 to 1. They know that just across the compound, there is an armory. It is packed with rockets, RPGs, machine guns, and mortars. They decide if they are not released the following morning, they will take matters into their own hands. They'll execute a full-scale breakout. If they do, the CIA's 2 covert agents will be caught in the middle. The 2 undercover agents, Mike Spann and Dave Tyson, arrive at the Kalajangi fort to begin the interrogations.
For them, the fighters were a source of intelligence. Let's get as much as possible intelligence from them and information. This was about 2.5 months after 9/11. And I think this of course, put the military and especially the CIA under an enormous stress and pressure to deliver the information, the intelligence.
Spann and Tyson need information to lead them to bin Laden, or intelligence on the next planned Al-Qaeda attack.
It was, the jobs of these interrogators to a large extent to figure out, well, what were these plans? What was coming next? And there was intense pressure on them to get answers to these questions because there was not going to be another way to get those answers.
But the fort is far from an ideal setup for questioning. The CIA interrogation manual sets clear guidelines on how to cross-examine a detainee. Interrogators should have time to memorize a detainee's history, to present files, dossiers, and photographs. They should have time to repeat their questioning, or to lure the prisoner into making the first move. Most of all, they should be able to keep the prisoner separate from other captives. In the open-air compound of the Afghan fort, playing it by the book just isn't possible. The fort is filled with hundreds of Taliban, guarded only by a handful of America's Northern Alliance allies. If anything goes wrong, they are on their own. The question is, do they go ahead with the interrogations? Or do they abandon their mission and pull out? It's a huge risk, but one they feel they must take. They adapt to the situation and improvise a plan.
first thing you need to do when you're trying to gather intelligence and you've got 600 prisoners is work out which ones know nothing, which ones might know something, and which guys are the real gems in terms of intelligence. So that first morning, they were processing the prisoners through this filter, if you like. Mike Spann was leading the questioning. So he was the guy doing the face-to-face with the prisoners. Dave Tyson was stood back with an AK-47, kind of watching over things. And then you had a few Northern Alliance soldiers on the battlements or at the entrance to the prison, bringing the prisoners out. But there was very few Northern Alliance guys around, so the security was very light.
After 2 hours, they notice one particular captive. He is unusually pale-skinned and is wearing items of Western clothing. They suspect he speaks English. They realize this could be the one man they can communicate with directly. The one man they can break. But the prisoner refuses to talk. Spann and Tyson have to move on, but not before the prisoner's image is sent back to the CIA's Langley headquarters and cross-referenced with known Al-Qaeda operatives on the CIA database. But identifying him will take time. He may be what they term a clean skin, an extremist not yet known to the CIA. So for now, Spann and Tyson are in the dark. In the basement prison, the hardline Taliban fighters realize what's going on. They will not succumb to interrogation.
I'm convinced the Taliban, they were not prepared to be questioned by Americans and not by the CIA.
Bear in mind, you've now got 600 of the hardest, most extreme prisoners in Afghanistan at that time, face-to-face with, as they see it, the enemy. And not just any old American enemy. These guys who are questioning them, they know they are special forces or CIA. These are the cream of America's warriors. These are the people of anyone that they most want to kill. And so you can imagine how explosive this confrontation is.
The Taliban decide the next group to be brought out to the compound will trigger a breakout. On the other side of the fort, a German journalist and his cameraman are in the northern compound headquarters building, waiting for permission to interview the prisoners.
Smoking a cigarette, waiting, birds singing, wonderful blue sky, cool, fresh air. A very peaceful setting. And then all of a sudden there were 1 or 2 explosions, grenades.
A Taliban prisoner detonates his grenade in a suicide attack.
Almost immediately after that, heavy small arms fire started. It was obvious this is not just a couple of shots being exchanged. This is a real heavy gunfight. And then I grabbed my set phone and ran for cover in the main building, which was like 20 yards away from where I had been at the time.
CIA operatives Spann and Tyson now realize they are facing a full-scale breakout.
Spann then had a decision to make. Marines do not take a back step. They go forward. They go forward in the face of the enemy.
Within seconds, Mike Spann is faced with a wave of attacking Taliban. Ambushed and outnumbered.
He could have run. He could have run and saved himself, but he didn't. He stepped forward and he decided to make a stand.
Just yards away, Spann's colleague Dave Tyson is powerless to help his friend. He has no choice but to make a break for it, towards the headquarters building. Tyson's arrival is captured on camera by the German TV crew and relayed around the world. This is actual footage of the event. His undercover status is immediately blown. Instinctively, Stout suspects Tyson is CIA.
I mean, to have an armed civilian American dressed like an Afghan on the ground meant something in the field of Secret Service.
Where are you from? Are you American?
He is very controlled, but you see he's very upset and nervous at the same time. And from, his appearance, I had the very clear impression that he had witnessed something horrible. I asked him, what is going on? This was my very simple question. And he said, there's an uprising of the prisoners.
What's happening? There's a prison uprising. Yeah. So, how many people they have got weapons? They stole them from them.
Tyson's mission is clearly compromised. He has to think of a way of keeping the operation alive. But he is on his own, and his weapons are empty. By now, the Taliban prisoners in the basement of the Pink House have killed their Northern Alliance guards. They ransack the armory.
At that stage, you had 600 guys armed with AK-47s, mortars, RPGs, PKM light machine guns.
Northern Alliance allies take up defensive positions and mount a counterattack, trying to keep the Taliban at bay. It's a vicious firefight. From the shelter of the headquarters building, CIA agent Dave Tyson can hear the battle escalate. Unless he can control the situation, the mission to extract vital information from the prisoners will fail. And an opportunity to track down Osama bin Laden will be lost. Agent Tyson uses journalist Stout's phone to call for backup. But he has a problem. He has no contact number for the US Special Forces Quick Reaction Force stationed locally. He has to improvise.
At the time, I didn't know, but later I checked the numbers from our sat phone. It was the number of the American embassy at Tashkent, Uzbekistan. That's where he called.
From the fort just outside Mazar-e-Sharif, Tyson calls a number he believes is his only option. The embassy in Tashkent patches Tyson through to the US Army Central Command at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, Florida. MacDill route him to the Special Forces local command base at Mazar-e-Sharif. By the time his emergency call reaches a fellow CIA paramilitary officer at base, it has traveled 20,000 miles. Tyson gives a full situation report. This is the actual recording of what he said.
We control the north end of the fort. The south end of the fort is in their hands. There's hundreds of dead here. At least. And I don't know how many Americans are. We just need help to free this place up.
Tyson warns that any intervention must be precise. There is hand-to-hand fighting. Enemy and allies in close proximity.
And he made it very clear, he repeated it like 3 times, saying, you can't come and bomb the place.
Can't hit it from the air.
Because friends and foes were so close to each other that they might have killed us by bombing.
On the other side of the fort, the heavily armed Taliban have identified the building in which Tyson and Stout are sheltering. They pound it with mortar shells.
It must have been, I think, a mortar grenade exploding just above the ceiling, which made an enormous impact in terms of acoustics. It was so loud, and my ear went.
In response, America's allies, the Northern Alliance, drive an old Russian tank onto the northern ramparts and bombard the enemy. Caught in the middle of the battle, all Tyson and Stout can do is hunker down and wait for help. Just 2 hours after the first shot is fired, that help arrives. The quick reaction force of US and British special forces that Tyson had requested.
I think it's the Brits who turn up first. In a Land Rover, wearing Barber jackets and jeans, and they're all called things like Scruff and Ginge. It's hilarious. And they're moaning. The driver's moaning. He's saying, oh, there's nowhere to park. You know, meanwhile, there's back. You know, and I was taking all this out. It's just fantastic sort of, you know, the elite of Britain's army, you know, moaning while they sort of casually go about sort of organising this battle. And then the Americans turn up as well, and there's more of them. There's about 8 of them, and they're much more aggressive. Let's do this, let's do that. The first thing they do when they arrive is they send someone up to put eyes on, as in have a peek over and work out what the hell's going on. What are we facing here? How many people? How are they armed?
The team's commander assesses the situation. He has just 15 men. His Northern Alliance allies number around 50. The enemy has 600. Despite this, the quick reaction force goes in and takes on their enemy.
It's like a scene from Armageddon. You've got tracer rounds going to the sky, you've got RPGs firing off. This has kicked off into a major firefight. And at the moment, you've just got a few Northern Alliance soldiers there trying to put down the uprising. It is a hopeless situation.
Very quickly, the special forces realize they're not going to be able to crush the uprising on their own. They will need to adapt.
The special skill that the special forces have is that they are able to handle it, and that they're able to go in with the plan, and when that becomes impossible, they're able to make another one quite quickly. And that's the edge that they have.
Okay, let's go. Despite the fact that friend and foe are fighting in extremely close quarters, the Special Forces team makes the decision to bomb the Taliban from the air.
The one advantage, apart from their training and their superlative abilities, the one advantage they can very often rely on is air power. Because air power evens up the odds somewhat. You can have a few guys behind enemy lines, but if they can call in airstrikes, they can have the effect of hundreds. Get the airstrikes in, get the enemy's head down. It's the shock factor as much as anything else that puts the enemy's heads down for a few seconds. There's always a danger when you call in airstrikes that, you know, the pilot will get it wrong and drop the ordnance on you. And in any case, in this situation, they were dropping danger close. They were dropping within a fraction of what the safe distances are. But there was nothing, I mean, what else could you do? So the risk of getting hit by their own munitions, the risk of friendly fire was significant, yeah. But, I mean, they had no option, they had no choice.
A Special Forces spotter team provides precise GPS coordinates for a bomber pilot circling overhead.
4646. This is 10. We're in position. Over.
They shine a range-finding laser, or SOFLAM, on the pink house, where the Taliban are taking shelter. Above them, an F-18 Hornet is armed with guided 500-pound JDAMs. Weapons designed to be accurate to within just 12 yards.
Copy that. Here they come.
One bomb after another rips through the southern end of the fort.
You hear this sound like a car that's in high gear, sort of decelerated, it's going woo, like that. And you can see this thing. It just pops out of the clouds like a javelin, coming, looks like it's coming straight at you, and then sort of, it's obviously off to the side. Boom! And everything jumps. The building that we're on jumps. And you black out for sort of, I don't know, half a second or so, and you sort of come to, you know, it's like you're rebooting or something.
The Taliban retreat past the bodies of at least 100 of their fellow fighters. The respite is only temporary, but it gives the Special Forces the opportunity they need to send in a search team to find missing in action CIA agent Mike Spann.
It's a US Navy SEAL maxim, you never leave a man behind. And it's a British military maxim that you never leave your buddies behind. There is no other decision to be made. We will go in.
After hours of looking and under heavy fire, the two-man rescue team reaches the southern compound. There, the spotter's search comes to an end.
He scans the southern end of the fort. I guess he wants to see him, but he doesn't want to see him. It's a horrendous situation to be in. And eventually he sees a guy lying on the ground, and he can see he's wearing blue jeans and a kind of shirt, which is exactly what, you know, CIA SAD operatives would wear.
The search team confirms they found the body of Agent Mike Spann. He is the first American casualty in the war on terror. Under fire, it's simply too dangerous to retrieve his body.
They can go no further. And so in what must have been the worst moment of the man's life, I would imagine, well, for both of them, they have to make the decision to turn around and leave a fellow soldier in the hands of the enemy.
They vow to return for him. On the other side of the fort, CIA agent Tyson doesn't yet know the fate of his colleague. He and reporter Arnim Stout are trapped on the roof of the headquarters building. Tyson knows, before nightfall, he must find a safer place from which to plan a strategy for somehow resuming interrogations. Crossing the roof risks them being picked off by a Taliban sniper. Even then, there seems to be no way down. But a Northern Alliance fighter reveals a possible route to safety.
There was one wounded Afghan. He had 2 or 3 gun wounds. Not very serious ones, but on his crutches, you know, he crossed the roof, someone helped him, and he slid down the wall and he disappeared.
Using his CIA training, Tyson calculates the risks. They must time their run between incoming bullets.
Hey guys, time to go.
Huh?
It's time to go.
I remember at one point Tyson just saying, "It's time to go," in a very decisive way. And that was the signal for everybody. And then one after the other, we crossed that roof. We slid down the wall. We ran towards that clay road, and there was a van there. You know, like out of nothing, there was a van as if we had ordered a cab, you know?
Stout is driven through the desert to safety. Tyson can regroup at the CIA's local base. The fate of his mission to locate Osama bin Laden now lies in the hands of the Special Forces and the success of their airstrikes. In the basement of the Pink House, the Taliban face their second night in the fort. Some 300 of their original 600 fighters lie dead. Everyone is convinced that with America's overwhelming firepower, the battle will be over by morning. But no one has foreseen the determination of the Taliban prisoners to fight to the death.
Setting up comms right now, over.
On the third day, further teams of US Special Forces arrive to assist the CIA's operation, together with reinforcements from the Afghan Northern Alliance. Inside the Pink House, there is no sign of surrender. So the air bombardments continue, despite the CIA's concerns that friend and foe are simply too close. But this time the bombs used won't be a standard 500-pound JDAM. This time, they're 4 times as big. The coordinates are dictated and confirmed.
0, 6.
And a countdown is given.
1, 2, 9er. Hey, Mr. B, they're about ready to drop. Pull back at this time.
Journalist Alex Perry joins the Special Forces teams, calling in the strikes.
Boom! You know, you hear it, woo, that. Boom! I mean, it shoots, 300 yards into the sky. Biggest thing we've ever seen. This is suddenly a 2,000-pounder, I learned. It puts a swimming pool-size hole in the wall.
The dust towers 1,000 feet high. But the bomb hasn't hit the intended target.
And we're thinking, that's where we were, that's where all those guys are, that's where the Americans are, they've just hit their own people.
A 2,000-pound American bomb has wiped out a Northern Alliance tank position. Up to 30 Alliance men have been killed. 5 US and 2 UK Special Forces men are badly injured. It's just as the CIA had warned. Friend and foe are too close together for airstrikes.
And you can just see all these guys coming out, just, they're grey with dust, pink eyes, and half of them are completely deaf. And we're just thinking, how many people died?
Day after day, the battle rages on.
Several days went by when you had like massive bombardments or big gun battles or, you know, maybe 200 guys on a parapet firing down to this thing. Nothing could possibly survive. And you go back the next day, and it's the same situation, and you're back to square one, and it starts again.
Taliban deaths are in the hundreds. Still, many fight on. Others regroup in the basement of the Pink House. Will any be left for the CIA to interrogate?
And if you look down on this quadrant, there were hundreds of bodies. And you're like, well, how, you know, it looks to me like everybody's dead. And you could tell that there was almost no one firing back. Maybe one, maybe two. So our assumption was, everybody's dead, but we were wrong.
In their Pink House refuge, the remaining Taliban are armed, defiant, and still refusing to surrender.
I think at some point it was obvious to them they would all die there.
The Afghan Northern Alliance are now in charge of the fort. But how can they flush out the remaining Taliban? They try firing into the building with guns and RPGs. They pour oil through the tiny windows and set it on fire.
This may sound brutal, okay? This may sound medieval and horrific, but bear in mind, they weren't trying to force them out to kill them. They were trying to force them out to accept their surrender.
But the Taliban don't want to surrender. Eventually, the Northern Alliance has just one remaining option: to flood the Taliban from their refuge. They divert a nearby stream directly into the Pink House basement. After 20 hours in freezing water, yet more of the hardliners perish. Somehow, 86 Taliban fighters survive. In the bitter cold of morning, they surrender.
They were starving, they had been firebombed, they had been shot at, they had been frozen with water. They were half drowning. But they came out of that basement largely to a man full of hatred and full of defiance.
To the men of the Special Forces, it is mission accomplished. But to the CIA, it's only the beginning. At last, they can return to interrogate the Taliban prisoners for vital information on Osama bin Laden's hideout. The CIA have to find out if the pale-skinned Taliban Spann and Tyson had picked out 6 days earlier survives. Of the original 600 Taliban, only 86 remain. And among the survivors is the man the CIA agents have identified as of particular interest. They confirm what they had originally suspected. He speaks English. At first, he claims his name is Suleiman Al-Faris. But then he reveals he is John Walker Lindh, a 20-year-old student from California.
It was a sort of miracle that this guy was alive. But he garnered attention, you know, not least because he was an American under Taliban, and that was just such a shock after 9/11. They couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe it.
Overnight, the world learns that jihadis can be of any race, any color, any nationality. Terror can be homegrown. Under interrogation, Walker Lindh confirms he met Osama bin Laden once at a training camp, but can reveal no intelligence on bin Laden's current hideout. Walker Lindh is charged with consorting with the enemy and is serving a 20-year sentence with no prospect of parole. The CIA's hunt for Osama bin Laden must continue. In the fort, the US Special Forces retrieve the body of CIA agent Mike Spann. It had been booby-trapped by the Taliban. A CIA officer for 3 years and father of 3, He is the first American casualty in the war on terror, buried with full honors as an American hero. As for his colleague, Agent Tyson, despite his cover being blown by the TV crew, he remains working at the CIA. In operations reports, he has been referred to variously as Dave, Dawson, and Olson. His current identity and whereabouts is known only to a few.
Yeah, we went to the compound the next day just to say hello. Did you get home safely? Are you okay? I gave him my business card. I mean, obviously, he didn't give me any.
Only now has the depth of the CIA's involvement in Operation Enduring Freedom, the invasion of Afghanistan, been revealed.
A tiny handful of Special Forces soldiers from the CIA mainly basically managed to roll back the Taliban with air power across the whole of the north of the country within a matter of weeks.
The work of the CIA's interrogators like Mike Spann and Dave Tyson in those early days provides crucial information in the pursuit of Al-Qaeda and the hunt for Osama bin Laden.
This was the main source of intelligence on this organization for a period of years, was being able to sit across the table in an interrogation booth from somebody who'd been recently captured and then persuade that person to give up as much information as possible.
Information that after over a decade of dedication, in May 2011, leads the CIA to a private compound in Abbottabad in Pakistan. And to the death of America's most wanted, Osama bin Laden.